They froze my salary on a Thursday afternoon and expected me to fetch coffee for the executive suite on Friday morning. That was the precise moment I realized we were no longer operating within a professional workplace. Instead, we had all become involuntary participants in some corporate-themed reality television show starring nepotism in expensive designer heels. My name is Eleanor Vance, and I had been with Apex Enterprises for 12 years. I was the compliance officer, at least on paper. In reality, I was the unofficial cleaner of everyone else's digital garbage. I was the person who quietly tidied up after directors who could not spell the word regulation, managers who believed an audit trail was a type of wine-tasting tour, and one vice president who used his corporate card to buy a hot tub and claimed it was for client immersion. I did not complain, gossip, or take lunch breaks. My superpower was simple. I remembered everything. I remembered every outdated protocol, every silent flag built into our ancient payroll back-end, and every access level signed off in a flurry of exits and mergers that nobody else had bothered to document. I was the last thread holding the compliance quilt together. Despite my tenure, I was invisible to the people who ran the company. People did not see Eleanor. They only saw the results of Eleanor's labor. They saw a compliance box checked on a spreadsheet, a federal audit successfully passed, and a quarterly report filed 30 seconds before the midnight deadline. To them, I was not a human being. I was a system function, and systems do not cry. They also do not get invited to happy hour at the bar down the street. The disruption to my quiet existence began 6 weeks ago when the new assistant to the chief executive officer arrived. Her name was Chloe Harrington, and she was 26 years old. If lip gloss could be classified as a leadership trait, Chloe would have been overqualified for the presidency. She possessed a dangerous mixture of intense confidence and complete cluelessness, the exact kind that allowed her to sound incredibly convincing in meetings even when she was merely reciting the ingredients of her morning beverage. The word around the water cooler was that she was connected to the family. Specifically, she was the niece of the chief executive officer's wife. She was the type of person who hugged everyone in the lobby but never refilled the coffee machine. Chloe had been at Apex Enterprises for less than a month before she decided she was the new cultural sheriff of the office. Suddenly, our inboxes were flooded with emails regarding workplace vibe expectations and mandatory Friday feel-good meetings featuring motivational quotes. Half the finance team was quietly job hunting in the break room. I did not pay much attention to her at first. People like Chloe came and went, making noise and leaving behind half-finished initiatives. But then came the quarterly team call. It was the meeting that turned a slow simmer of disrespect into a full corporate boil. We were doing quarterly check-ins over a video conference call. Cameras were required to be on, meaning everyone wore fake smiles. Half of the team was pretending to take notes while actually playing games on their phones. I was running 3 separate audit spreadsheets on my secondary monitor while keeping one ear on the conversation. When Chloe suddenly spoke up, "I just think it is wildly inappropriate that someone in this department would disrespect the chief executive officer's wife in public," Chloe said, flipping her long hair over her shoulder like it was a piece of punctuation. The virtual room went completely silent. "Eleanor, was it not you who made a snarky comment at the charity fundraising gala last weekend?" Chloe pressed, smiling the kind of smile you see on wolves in children's books. "She was deeply hurt by your words. Honestly, I think a public apology to her is in order." I blinked at my camera. "Could you repeat that?" I asked, thinking I had misheard. "You made a comment about her new business venture. The essential oils line," Chloe continued, her tone dripping with manufactured concern. Clara felt insulted. "We are fostering a culture of respect here now, and we cannot have senior staff undermining the family." I remembered the moment she was referring to, though it was barely a conversation. Clara Montgomery, the chief executive officer's wife, had cornered me near the seafood tower at the gala. She had launched into a 15-minute sales pitch about how her organic lavender oil cured her anxiety and her brother's joint pain. I had simply nodded, smiled, and eventually said, "Oh, essential oils. Those are bold." That was it. There was no eye roll, no sarcasm, just the single word bold. Apparently, that had insulted her retail empire, and now I was being publicly shamed in front of 40 of my colleagues. Effective immediately, your salary is frozen until this matter is formally addressed, Chloe added, as if she were declaring a state of emergency. Let this serve as a lesson in accountability. My direct supervisor, Ronald Fletcher, said absolutely nothing. He blinked like a confused turtle, minimized his video window, and pretended to study a document. Everyone else on the call either pressed their mute buttons or started glitching their cameras to make it look like their internet connection had failed. I sat very still in my chair. The anger did not hit me immediately. Instead, I felt a cold, hard clarity settle over me. Duly noted, I said. I moved my cursor to the red button and clicked End Call. That was the beginning. Not the revenge, not yet. First came the slow, methodical process of gathering facts. Because what Chloe did not realize was that systems like me never forget, and some access logs are never truly deleted. They just wait. The thing about humiliation is that it echoes. It does not behave like a fire alarm, loud and immediately demanding attention. Instead, it is more like a dripping faucet in a completely silent house. You keep thinking you have successfully tuned it out until it begins shaping your thoughts. That night after the video call, I sat in my kitchen chair staring at my cold coffee. I was 42 years old, and I had spent my entire adult life building a reputation for quiet reliability. Now, I was the villain in a domestic drama orchestrated by a 26-year-old assistant who did not know the difference between a balance sheet and a grocery list. I could feel the silence of the office wrapping around me like a cold blanket. I had not even changed out of my professional attire, but my income had been cut off by a person whose sole contribution to Apex Enterprises was organizing birthday card rotations. I opened my laptop. I did not log in to rage or send an angry message. In my profession, you do not throw tantrums. You log in, you verify, and you audit. It was simply muscle memory. I needed to see how the system recorded the freeze on my account. The new payroll dashboard was a pastel-colored disaster that constantly tried to autocorrect my work, but I did not use that. I went deeper, entering the command lines to access our legacy software, a system we called Echo Pay. Echo Pay had been built in 2009, and the executives had supposedly abandoned it in 2016 when we migrated to the new web-based platform. However, the old database still ran quietly in the background, mirroring every transaction. It was my private sanctuary. I did not trust the new system because it had too many administrators and too many permissions bundled together. Echo Pay was slow and stubborn, but it was honest. As I opened the archived access log, I expected to see the transaction where my account was marked as suspended. I expected to see Ronald Fletcher's authorization code, since he was my manager, or perhaps the human resources director's sign-off. But instead, my screen flickered, showing a single blinking entry that made me pause. It was an access flag from 2 days prior. Chloe Harrington's digital badge had been used to log in to a restricted payroll administration console. I leaned back in my chair. A chief executive officer's assistant had absolutely no business being inside that section of the system. At first, I assumed it was a simple mistake. New hires often clicked around randomly, exploring folders they did not understand. But this was not just random exploration. This console was buried so deep that even the technical support team rarely accessed it. Curiosity made me dig deeper. I began pulling access logs and cross-referencing activity trails. The humiliation I had felt during the team meeting evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. Chloe had frozen the salary of the one person in this building who knew exactly where the electronic bones were buried, and now she had left her footprints in a system that recorded everything. In Echo Pay, access permissions were logged with absolute precision. According to the database, Chloe's login credentials had been active inside the administration module for 11 minutes and 22 seconds. That was more than enough time to read sensitive documents or copy lists. But the most alarming discovery came 3 hours later. A small adjustment had been made to the chief executive officer's discretionary budget. The adjustment used a specific authorization code that belonged to a user named George Abernathy. George Abernathy had been our chief financial officer. He was a meticulous, old-school accountant who retired 7 years ago and now spent his days painting landscapes in Florida. His login credentials, tied to an internal authorization token, had never been formally retired when he left the company. It was a sloppy oversight by our IT department during the 2016 transition, but it was incredibly useful for whoever was now utilizing his digital ghost. I was not ready to call it fraud, but I was definitely paying attention. Once you catch the scent of a discrepancy, you either follow it through the brush or you get dragged along behind it. I opened a secure connection and pulled the complete history of the George Abernathy account. My fingers tapped rhythmically against the desk. The ghost login had been used to approve a payment of $6,000. The payment was processed 2 weeks ago and labeled as a special holiday bonus for a temporary project consultant. The name on the payment routing sheet was Frank Abernathy. I checked our current human resources directory. There was no employee file for a Frank Abernathy. There were no tax forms, no contractor agreements, and no record of any interview. But the surname was identical to our retired chief financial officer. A quick search of public social media records confirmed the connection. Frank was indeed George Abernathy's nephew, a young man who apparently worked as a freelance photographer. This was not a mistake by a curious assistant. This was a deliberate routing of corporate funds to an outside party using a retired executive's ghost credentials. And the digital trail showed that the initial access to the console had been paved using Chloe's own badge. I sat there in the quiet of my kitchen, the blue light of the screen illuminating my face. The shame of the team call was gone, replaced by a sense of purpose. I did not close my laptop. I kept searching, watching the digital path unfold before me. The investigation of digital trails requires a specific kind of patience. You cannot rush the databases. If you attempt to query too much information at once, the system will lag or crash, signaling your presence to the network administrators. I moved slowly, pulling small batches of records and saving them to an encrypted folder on my local drive. The $6,000 payment to George Abernathy's nephew was only the beginning. As I cross-referenced the timestamps from the retired chief financial officer's account with the server logs, I detected a pattern. The ghost credentials had been active on 3 other occasions within a 10-day window, always during off hours when the office was empty. The second transaction occurred at 9 p.m. on a Tuesday. The ghost account had approved a payment of $4,200 to a recipient named Sean Gallagher, listed as a coding consultant. A quick search of our contract management system revealed that Apex Enterprises had never hired a Sean Gallagher. There were no non-disclosure agreements, no tax forms, and no records of any code submitted to our repository. However, a search of public records showed that Sean was a former university classmate of Chloe Harrington. The third payment was even more complex. It was a sum of $8,500 routed to a vendor liaison named Samuel Davis. The funds were paid to a limited liability company registered in the state of Arizona. When I looked up the address of the company, it turned out to be a shared workspace mailbox in Phoenix. Samuel Davis, according to his social media profiles, was Chloe's close friend from her previous job. But the final transaction was the most audacious of all. It was a relocation stipend of $5,000 issued directly to Chloe Harrington herself. The payout had been routed through a dummy project budget labeled Client Enhancement Pilot. This budget line had been dormant for 4 fiscal years, yet someone had reactivated it, approving the transfer with the ghost signature of George Abernathy. I sat back, rubbing my temples. In a corporate environment, people often try to hide their transactions using virtual networks or spoofed addresses. But whoever was using the retired executive's credentials had made a rookie mistake. They had failed to clear the machine address of the device they were using. In the database log, every single action taken by the ghost account was stamped with the unique identifier of the laptop that initiated it. I opened our corporate asset inventory. I searched for the machine address. The search returned a single result. It belonged to the company-issued laptop currently assigned to Chloe Harrington. She had been using her official workstation to log in to the legacy payroll system, utilizing a retired executive's login to funnel thousands of dollars to her friends and herself, all while bragging about corporate culture and freezing my salary because I called a product bold. I did not print the files or storm into the Human Resources Department. That is how amateur players lose their advantage. Instead, I carefully compiled the logs, the machine address records, the asset certificates, and the bank routing details into an encrypted archive. I opened my email client. I drafted a short formal message. The recipient was Diana Jenkins, a junior associate in our legal department. I knew Diana. She was a sharp, no-nonsense lawyer who cared deeply about compliance and did not play political games. I did not copy my supervisor, Ronald Fletcher, or anyone in human resources. I wanted no paper trail that could be intercepted before the lawyers had a chance to review the facts. In the body of the email, I wrote, "Please review the attached access logs for EchoPay. We have detected unauthorized access to legacy administrative consoles. The records indicate multiple instances of financial transfers routed through a retired executive's credentials. The machine address associated with these entries matches the laptop assigned to Chloe Harrington." I then added the legal framework, noting that these actions constituted a direct violation of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, codified under Title 18, United States Code, Section 1930. Furthermore, the unauthorized alteration of payroll records and the use of another person's signature to authorize payments violated California Penal Code, Section 470, which addresses forgery and financial fraud. I attached the encrypted file, typed the password in a separate, secure message, and hovered my cursor over the send button. I took a deep breath and clicked send. The email vanished from my outbox. I did not feel a sense of triumph. I felt only the quiet satisfaction of a completed audit. The system was now aware of the anomaly, and systems do not ignore anomalies once they are formally documented. I shut down my computer, stood up, and went to bed. The next few days at Apex Enterprises were a masterclass in corporate irony. If smugness had a physical sound, it would have been the sharp, rhythmic clicking of Chloe Harrington's heels on the polished floor. Every step she took after the team call sounded like a victory lap, and she made sure everyone knew who she had defeated. Some people simply do not understand the new culture. I heard her say loudly to the receptionist one morning. She did not look at me, but she was standing close enough to my desk that I could smell her expensive perfume. "If you cannot evolve with the organization, you simply become a blocker. We need agile team players, not administrative relics." I said nothing. I kept my head down, typing my reports and reviewing files as if my salary were not currently frozen. I had passed dozens of regulatory audits during my 12 years at this company, and I was not about to let a 26-year-old assistant distract me from my routine. Experience teaches you that the loudest person in the room is rarely the most secure. On Wednesday, Chloe brought a pink bakery box filled with expensive cupcakes into the break room. She announced that it was a small gesture to reset the team's energy and foster a more positive environment. I watched as 3 of my colleagues suddenly claimed to have developed sugar allergies just to avoid accepting one from her hands. She spent the rest of the afternoon hovering around the department, pitching an idea for a corporate social media channel and suggesting we film video content about compliance. Ronald Fletcher, my supervisor, nodded along, his face frozen in his usual expression of mild confusion. Ronald was a man who hated conflict more than he liked efficiency, and he was terrified of offending this chief executive officer's family. Chloe did not see the subtle shifts occurring in the office. She was so convinced of her own power that she did not notice when people stopped making eye contact with her in the hallway. She did not notice how the laughter in the break room died down whenever she entered, or how the junior staff members began communicating with her only through official email channels. She mistook their quiet compliance for admiration, unaware that silence in an office is often the sound of people keeping their heads down to avoid falling debris. But I was watching, and I saw the signs. Diana Jenkins, the junior legal associate, did not make her usual afternoon rounds to chat about compliance deadlines. She kept her office door closed, which was highly unusual for the lawyer. Then, on Thursday morning, I spotted Gregory Hayes walking across the open floor. Gregory was the lead audit investigator, a man who wore shirts so stiff they looked like cardboard, and he had a reputation for having absolutely no sense of humor. Under his arm, he carried a thick blue binder labeled Access Level Verification. That specific binder only appeared when the legal department used the phrase potential employee misconduct. Gregory passed by Chloe's desk without a glance. She was busy showing someone a photograph on her phone, laughing loudly. She did not notice him. It was like watching someone dance on a frozen lake while the ice beneath them was already splintering into spiderwebs. Later that afternoon, our compliance software went offline for a scheduled maintenance window that had not been listed on the department calendar. I knew what that meant. The IT team was pulling the historical database backups, running forensic queries across the entire network, and verifying the digital signatures on every override transaction from the past 6 months. While Chloe was in a meeting, I saw 2 system engineers stand near her desk, observing her connection points and quietly making notes on a tablet. On Friday, the tension in the office was almost palpable. The usual weekend excitement was replaced by a quiet, heavy atmosphere. People moved quickly through the halls, carrying files and speaking in hushed tones. The break room, usually a hub of casual chatter on a Friday afternoon, was entirely empty. Chloe, completely oblivious to the changing air pressure, spent her afternoon discussing her weekend plans on speakerphone. She had swapped her standard corporate identification holder for a white leather designer lanyard, which she wore like a medal. She even stopped by my desk, offering a superficial smile that did not reach her eyes. "Eleanor, let me know if you need assistance accessing your training portal," she said, her voice dripping with artificial kindness. "I know these legacy systems can be difficult for the older staff members. We want to make sure everyone is up to speed." "I am managing fine, thank you," I replied, keeping my voice even. She smiled, adjusted her lanyard, and walked away. She had no idea that the legal department was currently mapping her access logs, matching the machine addresses, and documenting every dollar she had routed using the ghost credentials of George Abernathy. She thought she was the star of the show, but the writers were already drafting her exit. I finished my reports, locked my terminal, and went home for the weekend, knowing that Monday would bring the storm. Payroll Monday always arrived with a specific kind of tension. In a company where corporate morale was held together by cheap coffee and occasional pizza parties, payday was the only event that kept the staff focused. But this particular Monday, the atmosphere was different. I arrived at my desk early, I brewed a cup of black coffee, and logged into my system. The database was running normally, but I could feel the electrical charge in the air. At 9 o'clock in the morning, Chloe Harrington entered the building. She walked past the cubicles with her usual confidence, wearing high heels and carrying a new designer handbag. She was talking loudly on her phone, laughing about her weekend spa retreat and detailing how she had convinced the resort to waive her fees because of bad vibes. She stopped in front of the elevator glass to adjust her hair, winking at her own reflection. At 9:30 in the morning, the legal team arrived on our floor. There was no noise or warning. Diana Jenkins led the way, accompanied by Gregory Hayes and 2 other associates. They did not carry their standard folders. Instead, Gregory held a thick red file. In our company, a red file meant a critical security breach. They did not request a private meeting or pull Chloe into an office. They walked directly to the collaborative work area where Chloe was standing, gesturing with a metal straw as she explained her ideas for a department outing. Diana Jenkins's voice cut through the room like a razor. "Who gave you access to executive accounts?" Diana demanded, holding up a printed document from the red file. Chloe blinked, a nervous smile freezing on her face. "Excuse me?" she stammered. "This database log shows restricted access levels tied directly to your user credentials," Diana said, her voice carrying across the entire floor. "We have documented multiple unauthorized compensation overrides. Do you recognize these transactions?" Diana turned the document, displaying the list of payments. Chloe reached for the paper, but Diana pulled it back. "This is not a discussion," Diana continued. "This is a formal forensic review. We have verified that the machine address used to approve these payments matches your company laptop. You utilized the credentials of George Abernathy, a retired executive, to route corporate funds to Frank Abernathy, Sean Gallagher, and Samuel Davis. You also approved a relocation stipend for yourself. The entire office went dead silent. The programmers who always wore headphones had removed them, and every cursor on every screen seemed to stop moving. Ronald Fletcher emerged from his office, his face turning a deep shade of red as he clutched a notebook. "I did not do anything wrong," Chloe whispered, her voice cracking. "I was only looking at the old system. I did not know it was restricted. Logs do not lie," Gregory Hayes added, stepping forward. "We have pulled the badge access history for the server room and the network records. Every single transaction matches your physical presence and your device signature. This is a direct violation of company policy and federal law." Diana turned to the human resources representative who had joined the group. "Collect her badge, please." The representative extended her hand. Chloe hesitated, her fingers trembling as she unclipped the white leather designer lanyard she had paraded around the office. She placed the badge in the representative's palm. "We are conducting a complete security audit," Diana announced to the room. "If any employee has received an out-of-cycle payment or discretionary bonus within the last 90 days, you will be contacted by our department immediately." Chloe was escorted to her desk to collect her personal belongings, and then she was led out of the building. She did not leave with a cheerful farewell email. She simply vanished from the directory. By Wednesday afternoon, the chief executive officer, Charles Montgomery, called an emergency meeting for the entire staff. He stood at the front of the conference room, looking uncomfortable. He spoke at length about corporate values, integrity, and rebuilding trust, utilizing a series of vague phrases that meant very little. He never mentioned Chloe by name, nor did he mention his wife, Clara Montgomery. He simply announced that the company was tightening system permissions and implementing stricter oversight. On Friday, I was called into the Human Resources office. My supervisor, Ronald Fletcher, was not present. Instead, the Director of Human Resources sat across from me, offering a polite smile. "We have resolved the error on your account, Eleanor," she said, handing me a document. "Your salary freeze has been lifted, and we have processed 3 months of retroactive back pay. Furthermore, we are establishing a new position, Senior Compliance Audit Officer. This role reports directly to the legal department. We believe you are the only person qualified for the job." I nodded, accepting the paperwork. I did not say thank you. I simply shook her hand and walked back to my desk. A security technician was waiting for me. He handed me a new identification badge. It had a matte finish, an embedded chip, and a small marker in the corner indicating executive-level clearance. I sat down, placing the heavy badge next to my coffee. The office hummed around me as people returned to their work, but the atmosphere was completely different. Several of my colleagues nodded as they passed my desk, and one developer left a sticky note on my monitor that read, "Thank you for being the firewall." I smiled, peeled the note off, and logged back into my system. The database was waiting, and I had a lot of work to do, because systems do not forget, and neither do I.